So climate, greener, obviously the new commission, the president-elect rather, I should say, has put this top of her agenda. It's become an incredibly fraught political issue, as we saw just most recently at the G7 and with the Amazon fires. And obviously, I think perhaps for the first time in a truly substantial way, this really will be near the top of the European Commission agenda. So just getting started, what does this really mean in terms of policies? Because it's hard. It's one of those topics that's really hard to get past the label and past the communications benefits of greenwashing, if you will. So based on your research and your memo to the Commission, what would be really the very, very top priorities in this regard?
Well, in our view, the overarching aim of the new European Commission in terms of climate policy should be the one of fostering deep decarbonization in Europe in view of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Science is clear. Only by reaching climate neutrality by 2050, we can remain below a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees vis-à-vis the pre-industrial levels, which would prevent the most dramatic impacts of climate change in the planet. We need to do this in a way that becomes economically, industrially beneficial and socially acceptable. So first of all, the new European Commission will need to reverse the recent failure of the EU in unanimously pointing this target of 2050 climate neutrality very clearly. This should become Europe's polar star to drive both public and private action in the future. The Commission has the historical duty to make this economically and industrially beneficial, which means linking climate policy to industrial policy and also to development and foreign policy. Socially acceptable. This is key. The Gilets jaunes has demonstrated that only if society backs this process can continue. To do this, we have all the tools, but we need to launch a deep discussion in Europe, and we need member states to move consistently in this framework to really clarify which can be the pathways to achieve deep decarbonization that can really have the lower impacts on low-income households.
So let's just get more into these policies. Can you even give me 3 specific policies that you think would fly across the board, that the European Union can get behind and the Commission can propose to member states with some confidence that they will be taken up? Because obviously let's say the landscape across the member states is very different depending on national conditions. And one of the reasons one feels that the Commission sometimes stumbles, not just in this policy area, but other policy areas, is perhaps being less strong in diagnosing these divergences between member states, putting forward blanket policies that will not be taken up, and therefore setting oneself up for heartbreak. So what would you say are things that can be really pursued with some hope of success? And maybe this is a small wins scenario. You know, climate is such a sort of overwhelming and emotional issue. Maybe this is about something that's less, ambitious, that genuinely the Commission can say, you know what, we did this in 28, 27 member states, and they did it, and it worked. Yeah.
Well, first of all, there is no doubt that we need to provide a sensible carbon price in Europe. Only half of the European greenhouse gas emissions are priced, and the price remains far too low to drive investments. What the Commission should do, and Ursula von der Leyen was clear on that on the Parliament, is really to revise the current ETS system to enlarge its sectorial coverage, and why not also draft a carbon border tax in order to ensure that we don't encounter carbon leakage problem. The second idea might be the one of setting up a substantial financing mechanism to export the energy transition. Europe only contributes to 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's clear that if Europe is serious about fighting climate change, we need to move beyond our borders. We need to accompany our companies that want to make low-carbon investments abroad to do so in a confident manner. We need to use better the European Investment Bank or to set up new
So does that look like green
financing
bonds or?
Also, but really putting in place a system of guarantees to accompany the European private sector to go, for example, in Africa, where 600 million people remain without access to electricity, to provide them the low-carbon assets they need for the future. This is climate policy, again, but this is industrial policy. This is promoting the role of European enterprises abroad, and this is foreign policy as well, because it would contribute to political stability in our partner countries.
Sure. I'll take a Slido question from Anonymous. How can we make EU-wide carbon pricing socially acceptable? I mean, looking at the Yellow Vest movement, etc.
Yeah, sure. This is, of course, the golden question here. And what we can do to do this is really to use in a fair manner the revenues we get from this carbon pricing mechanism and redistribute these revenues to the low-income citizens. At Bruegel, last year, we have done a seminal work on the distributional effects of climate policy, and we have shown that different are the pathways to reach to climate neutrality in 2050. There are ways to do that in a sophisticated manner. Climate policy is not just about raising the price of gasoline at the pump. Clearly, you will get a social backlash if you do that, particularly from rural areas where people cannot, of course, avoid to use car to go to work and to commute and so on. You can start by taxing aviation. Aviation is still not within the area of the ETS. We might put, first of all, a carbon tax on the aviation sector.
Let me interrupt you right there because I have two questions here. This is great. You're getting warmed up, which relate to transport of the public at a mass scale.
Yeah.
And the one question by Anonymous is, what about reducing commercial air travel? And the second question, which I think sort of is a good accompany, is what about a fully integrated, fast, affordable railway system in Europe? Amen. How important should these, I mean, I really fully appreciate that the scale of industrial policy has got to be up there, but how we behave within Europe in terms of our transportation, I mean, I'm not going to get you to tell people they shouldn't have a third child or they should all go vegan, because, you know, that's also something that's being debated at the moment. But what about not taking planes, and what about supporting trains? That rhymed.
Fully agree. Transportation is becoming the major stumbling block in the European decarbonization process. While thinking about climate, about decarbonization, we tend to immediately look at energy, which is, of course, the key contributor. But actually, in terms of sectorial greenhouse gas emissions, the sector that is emitting the most today is transport. Over the last 20 years, emissions have strongly declined in all sectors of the European economy. They have increased by 20% in the transport sector. So we need a new strategy to decarbonize the European transport. And to do this, we have two main pathways. The first is to promote modal shift. We need to ensure that, for example, among the cities in Europe that can be connected through high-speed train, people will use that modality instead of flying. Second, we need to invest in cleaner vehicles and cleaner means of transport, which, again, goes back to the industrial policy discussion. We need to make sure that the European automotive industry is a leader in electric vehicles, is a leader in the storage, in the batteries, and that you can do, first, carbon pricing, which provides the investment signals in the long term, and second, environmental standards.